Welcome to Classic Paranormal, where we bring you true stories of the weird, strange, and otherworldly from works of literature from the past that time forgot. Don't forget to hit the share button to help promote this podcast. In this third episode, you will be entertained by Elsa Barker's Letters from a Living Dead Man, first published in 1919. Letter 28. Accept ye be as little children. I once heard a man refer to this world as the play world, for he said, we are all children here, and we create the environment that we desire. As a child at play can turn their chair into a tower or a prancing steed, so we in this world can make real for the moment whatever we imagine. Has it never filled you with amazement, that absolute vividness of the imagination of children? A child says unblushingly and with conviction, that rug is a garden, that plank in the floor is a river, that chair is a castle, and I am a king. Why does he say these things? How can he say these things? Because, and here is the point, he still subconsciously remembers the life out here which he so lately left. He has carried over with him into the life of Earth something of his lost freedom and power of imagination. That does not mean that all things in this world are imaginary. Far from it. Objects here, objects existing in tenuous matter, are as real and comparatively substantial as with you. But there is the possibility of creation here. Creation in a form of matter even more subtle still. Thought substance. If you create something on Earth in solid matter, you create it first in thought substance. But there is this difference between your creation and ours. Until you have molded solid matter around your thought pattern, you do not believe that the thought pattern really exists save in your own fancy. We out here can see the thought creations of others if we and they will it so. We can also, and I tell you this for your own comfort, we can also see your thought creations, and by adding the strength of our will to yours, we can help you to realize them in substantial form. Sometimes we build here bit by bit in the four-dimensional world, especially when we wish to leave a thing for others to see and enjoy, when we wish a thing to survive for a long time. But a thought form is visible to all highly developed spirits. Of course, you understand that not all spirits are highly developed. In fact, very few are far progressed. But the dullest man out here has something which most of you have lost, the faith in his own thought creations. Now, the power which makes creation possible is not lost to a soul when it takes on solid matter again. But the power is gradually overcome, and the imagination is discouraged by the incredulity of mature men and women who say constantly to the child, that is only play. That is not really so. That is only imagination. If you print these letters, I wish you would insert here fragments from that wonderful poem of Wordsworth, Intimations of Immortality from Recollections of Early Childhood. Quote, our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life's star, hath had elsewhere its setting, and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness, and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come. From God who is our home, heaven lies about us in our infancy. Shades of the prison house begin to close upon the growing boy, but he beholds the light, and once it flows, he sees it in his joy. The youth who daily farther from the east must travel, still is nature's priest, and by the vision splendid is on his way attended. At length the man perceives it die away, and fade into the light of common day. End quote. There is almost no limit to the possibilities of the imagination, but to get the full power of it, one must trust one's imagination. If you say to yourself constantly, as the mother says to the child, but this is only play, this is not real, you never can make real the things you have created in thought. The imagination itself is like a child and must be encouraged and believed in, or it cannot develop and do its perfect work. It is really fortunate for some of you that I'm out here. I can do more for you here than there, because I have ever greater faith in my imagination than I had before. The man who called this the play world has been trying all sorts of experiments with the power in himself. I have not his permission to tell the stories he tells me, but they would surprise you. For one thing, he helped his wife after his so-called death to carry out a joint plan of theirs which had seemed impossible to them before because of their lack of real faith. It was for the erection of a certain kind of house. But do not fancy that most people here are trying to build houses on Earth. Far from it. Most of my fellow citizens are willing to work where they are and to let the Earth alone. Of course, there are dreamers like me who are not satisfied with one world and who like to have their fingers in both. But they are rather rare, as poets are rare on Earth. To most men, the world where they happen to be in is sufficient for the time being. There is a certain fancy of mine, however, which it will amuse me to help realize on Earth. You may not know that I am doing it, but I shall know. I would not, for the world as you say, disturb anybody and even the thought that I am fussing around in affairs which are now theirs. But if, unseen and unfelt, I can help with the power of my self-confident imagination, there will be no harm, and I shall have demonstrated something. Letter 29. The Unexpected Warning. I should be very sorry if the reading of these letters of mine should cause foolish and unthinking people to go spirit hunting, inviting into their human sphere the irresponsible and often lying elemental spirits. Tell them not to do it. My coming in this way through your hand is quite another matter. I could not do it if I had not been instructed in the scientific method of procedure. And I also could not do it if you should constantly interrupt me by side thoughts of your own, and by questions relevant or irrelevant. It is because you are perfectly passive and not even curious, letting me use your hand as on earth I would have used the hand of my stenographer, that I am able to write long and connected sentences. Most spirit communications, even when genuine, have little value, for the reason that they are nearly always colored by the mind of the person through whom they pass. You were right in reading nothing on the subject while these messages are coming, and in thinking nothing about this plane of life where I am. Thus you avoid preconceived ideas which would interrupt the flow of my ideas. You know perhaps that while on earth I investigated spiritualism as I investigated many things of an occult nature, looking always for the truth that was behind them. But I was convinced then, and I am now more than ever convinced, that except for the scientific demonstration that such things can be, which of course has a value as a demonstration only, most spirit hunting is not only a waste of time, but an absolute detriment to those who engage in it. This may sound strange coming from a so-called spirit, one who is actually at this time in communication with the world. If that is so, I cannot help it. If I seem inconsistent, then I seem so. That is all. But I wish to go on record as discouraging irresponsible mediumship. If a person sitting for mediumship could be sure that at the other end of the psychic line there was an entity who had something sincere and important to say, and who really could use him or her to say it through, it would be another matter. But this world out here is full of vagrants, even as the earth. As this world is peopled largely from your world, it is inevitable that we have the same kind of beings that you have. They have not changed much in passing through the doors of death. Would you advise any delicate and sensitive woman to sit down in the center of Hyde Park and invite the passing crowds to come and speak through her, or touch her, or mingle their magnetism with hers? You shudder. You would shudder more had you seen some of the things which I have seen. Then too there is another class of beings here, the kind which we used to hear the Theosophists call elementals. Now, there has been a lot of nonsense written about elementals. But take this for a fact. There are units of energy, units of consciousness which correspond pretty closely to what the Theosophists understand by elementals. These entities are not as a rule very highly developed, but as the stage of earth life is the stage to which they aspire, and as it is the next inevitable stage in their evolution, they are drawn to it powerfully. So do not be too sure that the entity which raps on your table or your cupboard is the spirit of your deceased grandfather. It may be merely a blind and very desirous entity, an eager consciousness trying to use you to hasten its own evolution, trying to get into you or through you so as to enjoy the earth and the coarser vibrations of the earth. It may not be able to harm you, but on the other hand, it may do you a great deal of harm. You had better discourage such attempts to break through the veil which separates you from them. For the veil is thinner than you think, and though you cannot see through it, you can feel through it. Having said this, my duty in the matter is discharged, and the next time I come I can tell you a story, maybe instead of giving you a lecture. I really feel like an astral Scheherazade, but I fear you would tire of me before 1,001 nights were past. 1,001 nights. Before that time I shall have gone on. No, I do not mean died again into another world beyond. But when I get through telling you what I desire you to know about my life here, I want to investigate other stars, if it shall be permitted. I am like a young man who has lately inherited a fortune and has at last unlimited means and opportunity for travel. Though we might stay around a few months, getting matters in shape and becoming adjusted to his new freedom of movement, yet the time would come when he would want to try his wings. I hope that is not a mixed metaphor. If so, you can edit me. I shall not feel hurt. Letter 30. The Sylph and the Magician. If your eyes could pierce the veil of matter and you could see what goes on in the tenuous world around and above the city of Paris, you would gasp with wonder. I've spent much time in Paris lately. Shall I tell you some of the strange things I have seen? In a street on the left bank of the river called the Rue de Vaugirard, there lives a man of middle age and sedentary habits who is a sort of magician. He is constantly attended and served by one of the elemental spirits known as sylphs. This sylph he calls Marilyn. I do not know from what language he got the name, for he seems to speak several and to know Hebrew. I have seen this Marilyn coming and going to and from his apartment. No, it would not be right for me to tell you where it is. The man could be identified, though the sylph would elude the census taker. Marilyn does not make his bed or cook his broth, for which humble service he has a charwoman. But the sylph runs errands and discovers things for him. He is a collector of old books and manuscripts, and many of his treasures have been located by Marilyn in the stalls which lie along the banks of the Seine and also in more pretentious bookshops. This man is not a devil worshipper. He is only a harmless enthusiast, fond of occult things and striving to pierce the veil which shuts the elemental world from his eyes. A little less brandy and wine and he might be able to see clearly, for he is a true student. But he is fond of the flesh, and it preys upon the spirit. One day I encountered Marilyn going upon one of his errands, and I introduced myself by signaling with my hands and calling my name. This attracted the attention of the sprite, who came and stood beside me. "Where are you going?" I asked, and she nodded towards the other side of the river. The thought came to me that perhaps I ought not to question the servant of the good magician as to her master's business, so I hesitated. She also hesitated. Then she said, "But he is interested in the spirits of men." This made the matter simpler, and I asked, "You do his errands?" "Yes, always." "Why do you do his errands?" "Because I love to serve him." "And why do you love to serve him?" "Because I belong to him." I thought every soul belonged to itself. But I am not a soul. Then what are you? A sylph. Do you ever expect to be a soul? Oh yes, he has promised that I shall be if I serve him faithfully. But how can he make you to be a soul? I don't know, but he will. How do you know that he will? Because I trust him. What makes you trust him? Because he trusts me. And you always tell him the truth? Always. Who taught you what truth is? He did. How? This seemed to puzzle the being before me, and I feared she would go away. So I detained her by saying quickly, "I do not want to worry you with questions which you cannot answer. Tell me how you first came into his service." "Ought I? So you have a conscience?" "Yes, he taught me to have." "But you say that he is interested in the spirits of men." "Yes, and I also know good spirits from bad ones." "Did he teach you that?" "No." "How did you learn?" "I always knew." "Then you have lived a long time?" "Oh yes." "And when do you expect to have, or to become a soul?" "When he comes out here into the world where we are." This staggered me by its daring. Had the good magician been deceiving himself, or did he really believe what he promised? "What did he say about it?" I asked. "That if I would serve him now, he would serve me later." "And how is he going to do it?" "I don't know." "Suppose you ask him." "I never ask questions, I answer them." "For instance, what sort of questions?" "I tell him where such and such a person is, or what he or she is doing." "Can you tell him what these people are thinking?" "Not often, or not always. Sometimes I can." "How can you tell?" "By the feel of them. If I am warm in their presence, I know they are friendly to him. If I am cold, I know they are his enemies. If I feel nothing at all, then I know that they are not thinking of him, or are indifferent." "And your errand this evening?" "To see a lady." "Are you not jealous?" "What is jealous?" "You are not displeased that he should interest himself in ladies?" "Why should I be?" This was a question I could not answer, not knowing the nature of sylphs. She surprised me a little, for I had supposed that all female things were jealous. But fearing again that she might leave me, I hurried to question her further. "How did you make his acquaintance?" I asked. "He called me." "How?" "By the incantation." "What incantation?" "The call of the sylphs." "Oh," I said, "he called the sylphs and you came?" "Yes, of course. I liked him for his kindness, and I made him see me." "How did you manage it?" "I dazzled his eyes before he closed them, and then he could see me." "Can he always see you now?" "No, but he knows I am there." "He can see you sometimes still?" "Yes, often." "And when he saw you first?" "He was delighted and called me lovely names and made me promises." "The promise of a soul, that first time?" "Yes." "Then you would have wanted to have a soul?" "Oh yes." "But why?" "Many of us want to be men. We love men, that is, most of us do." "Why do you love men?" "It is our nature, but not the nature of all of you. There are malignant spirits of the air." "And what will you do when you have a soul?" "I will take a body and live on earth." "And leave your friend whom you now serve?" "Oh no, it is to be with him that I specially want a body." "Then will he come back to the earth with you?" "He says so." This again staggered me. I was becoming interested in this magician. He had a daring imagination. Could a spirit of the air develop into a human soul, I asked myself? Was the man self-deceived? Or again, was he deceiving his lovely messenger? I thought a little too long this time, for when I turned again to speak to my strange companion, she had left me. I tried to follow, but could not find her. And if she returned soon, it must have been by some other road. Though I looked in all directions, she was invisible to me. Now, the question will arise in your mind, in what language did I talk with this aerial servant of a French magician? I seemed to speak in my own tongue, and she seemed to respond in the same. How is that? I cannot say unless we really used the subtle language of thought itself. You may often, on meeting with a person whose language you do not speak, feel an interchange of ideas by the look of the eyes, by the expression of the face, by gestures. Now imagine that intensified 100-fold. Might it not extend to the simple questions and answers which I exchanged with the sylph? I do not say that it would, but I think it might. For as I said before, I seemed to speak and she seemed to reply in my own language. What strange experiences one has out here. I rather dread to go back into the world where it will be so dull for me for a long time. Can I exchange this freedom and vivid life for a long period of somnolence afterwards to suck a bottle and learn the multiplication table in Greek and Latin verbs? I suppose I must, but not yet. Good night. Letter 31. A problem in celestial mathematics. By the vividness with which you feel my presence at times, you can judge of the intensity of the life that I am living. I am no pallid spook dripping with grave dew. I am real and quite as wholesome, or so it seems to me, as when I walk the earth in a more or less unhealthy body. The ghastly specters, when they return, do not talk as I talk. Ask those who have seen and heard them. It is well that you have kept yourself comparatively free of communications from the other world. It would have been amazing had you been afraid of me. But there are those who would be if they should sense my presence as you sense it. One night I knocked at the door of a friend's chamber, half expecting a welcome. He jumped out of bed in alarm, then jumped back again and pulled the blanket over his head. He was really afraid that it might be I. So as I did not wish to be responsible for a case of heart failure or for a shock of hair which, like in that old song, turned white in a single night, I went quietly away. Doubtless he persuaded himself next day that there were mice in the wainscoting. Had you been afraid of me, though, I should have been ashamed of you, for you know better. Most persons do not. It is a real pleasure for me to come back and talk with you sometimes. There are no friends like old friends, and the society of sylphs and spirits would never quite satisfy me if all those whom I had known and loved should turn their backs on me. Speaking of sylphs, I met the teacher last night and asked him if that French magician I told you about could really make good his promise to his aerial companion and help her to acquire the kind of soul essential to incarnation on earth as a woman. His answer was no. Of course, I asked him why, and he answered that the elemental creatures, or units of force inhabiting the elements as we use that term, could not during this life cycle step out of their element into the human. Could they ever do so, I asked. I do not know, he replied, but I believe that all the less evolved units around the earth are working in the direction of man, that the human is a stage of development which they will reach someday, but not in this life cycle. I asked the teacher if he knew the magician in question, and he answered that he had known him for 1,000 years, that long ago in a former life the Paris magician had placed his feet upon the path which leads to power, but that he had been sidetracked by the desire for selfish pleasures, and that he might wander a long time before he found his way back to real and philosophical truth. Is he to be blamed or pitied, I asked. Pity cuts no figure in the problem, the teacher replied. A man seeks what he desires. After the teacher went away, I began asking myself questions. What was I seeking, and what did I desire? The answer came quickly. Knowledge. A year ago I might have answered power, but knowledge is the forerunner of power. If I get true knowledge, I shall have power enough. It is because I want to give to you, and possibly to others, a few scraps of knowledge which might be inaccessible to you by any other means that I am coming back, and coming back time after time to talk with you. The greatest bit of knowledge that I have to offer you is this, that by the exercise of will, a man can attain his objective consciousness after death. Many persons out here sink into a sort of subjective bliss which makes them indifferent as to what is going on upon the earth or in the heavens. I could do so myself easily. As I believe I said before, while man on earth has both subjective and objective consciousness but functions mostly on the objective, out here he has still subjective and objective consciousness, but the tendency is toward the subjective. At almost any time on composing himself and looking in, you can fall into a state of subjective bliss which is similar to that enjoyed by souls on this side of the dividing line called death. In fact, it is by such subconscious experience that man has learned nearly all he knows regarding the etheric world. When the storms and passions of the body are stilled, man can catch a glimpse of his own interior life, and that interior life is the life of this four-dimensional plane. Please do not accuse me of contradicting myself or of being obscure. I have said that the objective consciousness is as possible with us as the subjective is with you, but that the tendency is merely the other way. You may remember a pair of lovers about whom I wrote you a few weeks ago. He had been out here some time and had waited for her and helped her over the uncertain marshlands which lie between the two states of existence. I saw these lovers again the other day, but they were not at all excited by my appearance. On the contrary, I fancy that I put them out somewhat by awakening them, by calling them back from that state of subjective bliss into which they have sunk since being together at last. While he waited for her all those years, he kept himself awake by expectation. While still on Earth, she was always thinking of him out here, and so the polarity was sustained. Now they have each other. They are in the little home which he built for her with so much pleasure out of the tenuous materials of this tenuous world. They see each other's faces whether they look out or in. They are content. They have nothing more to attain, or so they tell each other, and they consequently sink back into the arms of subjective bliss. Now this state of bliss, of rumination, they have a right to enjoy. No one can take it from them. They have earned it by activity in the world and elsewhere. It is theirs by rhythmic justice. They will enjoy it, I fancy, a long time, living over the past experiences which they have had together and apart. Then someday one or the other of them will become surfeited with too much sweetness. The muscles of his or her soul will stretch for want of exercise. He or she will give a spiritual yawn, and by the law of reaction pass out, not to return. Where will he or she go, you ask? Why, back to earth, of course. Let us imagine him or her awaking from that subjective state of bliss which is known to them as attainment, and going for a short promenade in blessed and wholesome solitude. Then, with a sort of morning alertness in the heart and the eye, he or she draws near to a pair of earthly lovers. Suddenly the call of matter, the eager, terrible call of blood and warmth of activity raises to the nth power, catches the half-awakened soul on the ethereal side of matter, and he has again entered the world of material formation. He is sunk and hidden in the flesh of earth. He awaits birth. He will come out with great force by reason of his former rest. He might even become a captain of industry if he is a strong unit. But I began by saying he or she. Let me change the figure. The man would be almost certain to awake first by reason of his positive polarity. Now in drawing this imaginary picture of my lovers, I am not making a dogma of the way in which all souls return to earth. I am merely guessing how these two will return, for she would probably follow him speedily when she awoke and found herself alone. And the reason why I fancy they will return in that way is because they are indulging themselves in too much subjective bliss. When will they go back? I cannot say. Perhaps next year, perhaps in 100 years. Not knowing the numerical value of their unit of force, I cannot guess how much subjective bliss they can endure without a violent reaction. I am sure that you are wondering if someday I shall myself sink into that state of bliss which I have described. Perhaps. I should enjoy it, but not for long, and not yet. However, I have no sweetheart out here to enjoy it with me. Letter 32. A change of focus. With the guidance of the teacher during the last few weeks, I have been going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. You smile at the veiled reference, but if not certain of your friends actually feared me as if I were the devil of the book of Job. Now, to be serious, I have been visiting those lands and cities where in former lives I have lived and worked among men. One of the many advantages of travel is that it helps a man to remember his former existences. There is certainly a magic in places. I have been in Egypt, in India, in Persia, in Spain, in Italy. I have been in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Greece, Turkey, and many other lands. The Dardanelles were not closed to me recently when by reason of the war you could not have passed through. There are advantages to almost every condition, even my present one. For the law of compensation holds good. In certain lives of the past I was a wide traveler. Now you may wonder how it is I pass easily from this world to yours, seeing into both. But you must remember that your world and mine occupy about the same space. That the plane of the Earth's surface is one of the lower and more material planes of our world, using the word plane as you would use the word layer. As I've said before, there are also places accessible to us which lie at some distance above the Earth's surface. Mansions in the sky are more than figurative. I have only slightly to change my focus at any time to find myself in your world. That I cannot be seen there with the naked eye is no proof that I am not there. Without that change of focus, which is done through an action of will and by knowing the method, I might even be occupying the same space as someone in your world and not know it. Note well this point, for it is only half of something which I have to say. The other half is that you also may at any time, so far as space is concerned, be in the immediate neighborhood of interesting things in our world and not know that you are there. But if you focus to this world, you are more or less conscious of it. So when I, knowing how to focus to your world, I am there in consciousness and can enjoy the varied sights of many cities, the changing aspects of many lands. When I first came out, I could not see my way about the earth very well, but now I can see better. No, I am not going to give you a formula to give to other people by which you or they could change focus at will and enter into relation with this world, because such knowledge at the present stage of human progress would do more harm than good. I merely state the fact and leave the application for those who have the curiosity and the ability to demonstrate it. My object in writing these letters is primarily to convince a few persons, to strengthen their certainty in the fact of immortality or the survival of the soul after the bodily change which is called death. Many think they believe who are not certain whether they believe or not. If I can make my presence as a living and vital entity felt in these letters, it will have the effect of strengthening the belief of certain persons in the doctrine of immortality. This is a materialistic age. A large percentage of men and women have no real interest in the life beyond the grave. But they will all have to come out here sooner or later, and perhaps a few will find the change easier, the journey less formidable by reason of what I shall have taught them. Is it not worthwhile? Is it not worth a little effort on your part as well as on mine? Any person approaching the great change who shall seriously study these letters and lay their principles to heart and who shall will to remember them after passing out need not fear anything. We all fail in much that we undertake, but I hope I shall not fail in this. Do not fail me on your side. I could not do this work without you, nor could you do it without me. That is the answer to the supposition that I am your subconscious mind. I have been in Constantinople and have stood in the very room where I once had a remarkable experience hundreds of years ago. I have seen the walls, I have touched them, I have read the etheric records of their history and my own history in connection therewith. I've walked the rose gardens of Persia and have smelled the flowers, the grandchildren hundreds of times removed of those roses whose fragrance was an ecstasy to me when watching with the booble. I paced there in another form and with intentions different to mine now. It was the perfume of the roses which made me remember. In Greece also I have lived over the old days. Before their degeneration began, what a race they were. I think that concentration was the secret of their power. The ether around that peninsula is written over with their exploits and daring thought as well as daring action. The old etheric records are so vivid that they shine through the later writings. For you must know that what are called astral records lie layer against layer everywhere. We read one layer instead of another, either by affinity or by will. It is no more strange than that a man may go among the millions of volumes in the British Museum and select the one he wants. The most marvelous things are always simple of explanation if one has the key to unlock the mystery. There has been much nonsense written about vibration, but nevertheless truth lies thereabouts. Where there is so much smoke, there must be fire. In India, I have met with yogis in meditation. Do you know why their peculiar way of breathing produces psychic results? No, you do not. Now let me tell you. By holding the breath long, a certain, shall I say, poison is produced in the body, which poison acting on the psychic nature changes the vibration. That is all. Volumes have been written about yoga, but have any of them said that? The untrained healthy lungs in the ordinary operation get rid of this poison by processes well known to physiologists. That is, in the natural man, adjusted to and working contentedly on the material plane. But in order for a man still living on the material plane to become adjusted to the psychic world, a change of vibration is necessary. This change of vibration may be produced by a slight overdose of the above-mentioned poison. Is it dangerous? Yes, to the ignorant. To those who are learned in its use, it is no more dangerous than most of the drugs in the pharmacopoeia. Another time I will tell you about secrets which I have discovered going to and fro in the earth and walking up and down in it. Letter 33. 5 Resolutions. I have stood at night on the roof of an oriental palace and watched the stars. You who can see into the invisible world by changing your focus can easily understand how I, by a reverse process, can see into the world of dense matter. Yes, it is the same thing, only turned the other way. I stood on the roof of an oriental palace and watched the stars. No mortal was near me. Looking down upon the sleeping city, I have seen the clouds of souls which keep watch above it, have seen the messengers coming and going. Once or twice a wan, half-frightened face appeared among the cloud of spirits, and I knew that down below in the city someone had died. But I had seen so many spirits since coming out here that I was more interested in watching the stars. I used to love them, and I love them still. Someday, if it is permitted, I hope to know more about them. But I shall not leave the neighborhood of the earth until these letters are finished. From the distance of the planet Jupiter, I might not be able to write it all. It is true that one may come and go almost with the quickness of thought, but something tells me it is better to postpone for a time my more extensive traveling. Perhaps when I get out there, I shall not want to come back for a long time. It means much to me, this correspondence with Earth. During my illness, I used to wonder if I could come back sometimes, but I never imagined anything like this. I would not have supposed it possible to find any well-balanced and responsible person with daring enough to join me in the experiment. I could not have written through the hand of a person of untrained mind unless he or she had been fully hypnotized. I could not have written through the hand of the average intellectual person because such persons cannot make themselves sufficiently passive. Be at peace. You are not a spirit medium, using the word as it is commonly used, signifying a passive instrument, an aeolian harp set in an aperture between the two worlds and played upon by any wind that blows. Except as illustrating the fact that it can be done, there is no great object in my telling you of the things I have seen in your world since coming to this other one. The next time you look out into the plane of life and see the wonderful landscapes and the people, remember that it is in a similar way that I look back into your plane of existence. It is interesting to live in two worlds, going back and forth at will. But when I go into yours, it is only as a visitor, and I shall never attempt to take a hand in its government. There is such a rigorous custom house on the frontier between the two worlds that the traveler back and forth cannot afford to carry anything with him, not even a prejudice. If you should come out here with the determination to see only certain things, you might give a wrong value to what you would see. Many have come out here at death with that mental attitude, and so have learned little or nothing. It is the traveler with the open mind who makes discoveries. I brought over with me only a few resolutions: to preserve my identity, to hold my memory of Earth, and to carry back the memory of this life when I should return to the world, to see the great teachers, to recover the memories of my past incarnations, to lay the necessary foundation for a great Earth life when I should go back next time. That sounds simple, does it not? Already I have done much besides. But if I had not borne these points in mind, I might have accomplished little. The only really sad thing about death is that the average man learns so little from it. Only my realization of the fact that the chain of Earth lives is relatively endless could keep me from regret that most persons make so little progress in each life. But I comfort myself with the assurance that there is no hurry, that the pearls in the chain of existence, though small, are all in their inevitable places, and that the chain is a circle, the symbol of eternity. And it seems to me, with my still finite view, that most men on this side waste their lives even as they do on your side. That shows how far I am yet from the ideal knowledge. Viewed from the stars, whence I hope someday to view them, all these flat stretches in the landscape of life may be softened by distance, and the whole picture may take on a perspective of beauty which I had not dreamed of while I myself was but a speck upon the canvas. Letter 34. The Passing of Lionel. I have lost my boy Lionel. He is gone. I started to say the way of all flesh, but I must revise the figure and say way of all spirits sooner or later, and that way is back to the earth. One day not long ago I found him absorbed in thought in our favorite resting place, the little hut beside a stream at the foot of the wooded hill which I told you about in one of my former letters. I waited for a time until the boy opened his eyes and looked at me. "Father," he said, "my favorite teacher is going to be married tomorrow." "How do you know?" I asked. "Why, I have been listening," he answered. "Every little while I go back and pay her a visit, though she does not know I am there. I have been aware that there was something in the wind." "Why?" "Because she has been so shining. There is a light around her which was not there before." "What caused the light, Lionel?" "Well, I suppose she is what they call in love." "You are a phenomenally wise child," I said. He looked at me with large, honest eyes. "I am not really a child at all," he answered. "I am as old as the hills as you or as anybody. Have you not told me that we are all immortal without end or beginning?" "Yes, but go on. Tell me about your teacher." "She's in love with the big brother of one of my playfellows. I used to know him when I was a little boy. He let me use his magnet and taught me kite flying and showed me how machinery went. He's an engineer." "Oh," I said. "In this case, of course, you're glad that your favorite teacher is going to marry him." Lionel's eyes were larger than ever as he said, "I shall be sorry to leave you, Father, but it is a chance I cannot afford to miss." "What?" "It's my opportunity to go back. I've been watching for it a long time." "But are you ready?" "What is it to be ready?" "I want to go." "And leave me?" "I shall find you again. And, oh, Father, when you come back I shall be older than you." This idea seemed to delight him. I was still human enough to be sorry that the boy was going of his own free will. But his will is free. I would not make any effort to detain him. Though young in that form, which had not yet had time to grow up in the tenuous world since he came out as a child, yet he was old in thought. "Yes," I said, "perhaps you can help me along when I also shall be a child again. You see," he went on, "with a father like Victor I shall learn all I want to know about machinery. That is, all that he can teach me. But when I am grown I shall find out for myself many things which he does not know. You remember the little machine I've been working with up in the pattern world?" "Yes. When I am back on the earth I shall make it a reality. Why, it actually runs now with the electricity from my fingers. But will it when you have fixed it in the material form, in steel, or whatever it is to be made of?" "Yes, of course it will." It is my invention. I shall be a famous man. But supposing that somebody else finds it first, I don't think anybody will. Shall I help you to lay a spell around the pattern so that no one can touch it? Could you do that, Father? I think so. Then let us go up there at once, he said, and do it immediately. I may have to leave this world in a day or two. I could not help smiling at the boy's desire to hurry. Doubtless he would be present at that wedding, and I should see little or nothing of him afterwards. We went up to the pattern world, and with his assistance I drew a circle around the little machine, a spell which I think will protect it until he is ready to make his claim. Oh inspiration, oh invention, genius. Little did the men of Earth know the meaning of those words. Perhaps the poet's famous poem was sung before his birth. Perhaps the engineer's invention lay in the pattern world, protected by a spell while he grew to manhood and advanced in science and made ready to claim it for his own, his prior and spiritual creation. Perhaps when two men discover or invent the same thing about the same time, one has succeeded in appropriating the design which the other left behind him when he came back to Earth. Sometimes perhaps both have taken from the invisible creation of a third man who still awaits rebirth. Lionel babbled on to me about the life to come and of what a charming mother Miss Blank would be. She had always been good to him. Perhaps, I said, many of us who return immediately, as you hope to do, seek those who have been good to us in a former life. There is another point, Lionel said. Miss Blank is a friend of my own mother, the one I left a few years ago. It will be so good to have her hold my hand again. Do you think she will recognize you, I asked. Who knows? She believes in rebirth. How can you say that? You were so little when you came out. I was 7 years old, and already she had told me that we live many lives on Earth. Bless the souls who first brought that belief to the Western world, I exclaimed. And now, my boy, is there anything that I can do for you after you leave me? Yes, of course. You can watch over my mother and warn her if any danger threatens her or me. Then make me acquainted with her now. We went out into the material world, the boy and I. Already I have told you how we go. He took me to a little house in one of the suburbs of Boston. We entered a room. It was about 11 o'clock at night upon that part of the earth, and I saw a fair young woman kneeling beside her bed, praying to God that he would bless the union of the morrow which was to give her to the man she loved. Lionel went close to her and threw his arms about her neck. She started, as if she actually felt the contact, and sprang to her feet. Miss Blank, don't you know me?" he cried. But while I could hear him, she evidently could not, though she looked about her in a half-frightened way. Then, supposing that the touch and the presence she felt were imaginary, she again fell upon her knees and went on with her interrupted prayer. "Come away," I said to the boy, and we left her there with her dreams and her devotions. That was the last I saw of Lionel. He bade me goodbye, saying, "I shall stay near her for a few days. Perhaps I shall go back and forth from her to you. But if I do not return, I will meet you again in a few years." "Yes," I said, "it is affinity and desire which draw souls together, either on Earth or in the other world." When next I met the teacher, I told him about Lionel and asked him if he thought the boy could come out to me now and then after his life on Earth had begun as an unborn entity in the shelter of his mother's form. "Probably not," he replied. "If he were an adept soul, he might do that. But with a soul of even high development lacking real adeptship, it would be impossible." "Yet," I said, "men living on Earth do come out here in dreams." "Yes, but when the soul enters matter, preparing for rebirth, it enters potentiality, if we may use the term, and all its strength is needed in the Herculean effort to form the new body and adjust to it. After birth, when the eyes are opened and the lungs are expanded to the air, the task is easier, and there may be left enough unused energy to bridge the gulf. But," he went on, "those who are soon to be mothers are often vaguely conscious of the souls they harbor. Even when they do not grasp the full significance of the miracle that is being performed through them, they have strange dreams and visions which are mostly glimpses into the past incarnations of the unborn child. They see dream countries where the entity within has dwelt in the past. They feel desires which they cannot explain, reflected desires which are merely the latent yearnings of the unborn one. They experience groundless fears which are its former dreads and terrors. The mother who nourishes a truly great soul during this period of formation may herself grow spiritually beyond her own unaided possibility, while the mother of an unborn criminal often develops strange perversities, quite unlike her normal state of mind. If a woman were sufficiently intelligent and informed, she could judge from her own feelings and ideas what sort of soul was to be her child someday, and prepare to guide it accordingly. More knowledge is needed here as elsewhere. So, as in all my experiences, I learned something through the passing out of Lionel. Letter 35. The Beautiful Being. Yes, I have seen angels, if by angels you mean spiritual beings who have never dwelt as men upon the earth. As a man is to a rock, so is an angel to a man in vividness of life. If we ever experience that state of etheric joy, we have lost it through long association with matter. Can we ever again regain it? Perhaps. The event is in our hand. Shall I tell you of one whom I call the beautiful being? If it has a name in heaven, I have not heard it. Is the beautiful being man or woman? Sometimes it seems to be one, sometimes the other. There is a mystery here which I cannot fathom. One night I seemed to be reclining upon a moonbeam, which means that the poet which dwells in all men was awake in me. I seemed to be reclining upon a moonbeam, and ecstasy filled my heart. For the moment I had escaped the clutches of time and was living in the etheric quietude which is merely the activity of rapture raised to the last degree. I must have been enjoying a foretaste of that paradoxical state which the wise ones of the East call nirvana. I was vividly conscious of the moonbeam and of myself, and in myself seemed to be everything else in the universe. It was the nearest I ever came to a realization of the supreme declaration, I am. The past and the future seemed equally present in the moment. Had a voice whispered that it was yesterday, I should have acquiesced in the assertion. Had I been told it was a million years hence, I should have been also assentive. But whether it was really yesterday or a million years hence mattered not in the least. Perhaps the beautiful being only comes to those for whom the moment and eternity are one. I heard a voice say, "Brother, it is I." There was no question in my mind as to who had spoken. "It is I" can only be uttered in such a voice by one whose individuality is so vast as to be almost universal. One who is dipped in the ocean of the all, yet who knows the minute by reason of its own inclusiveness. Standing before me was the beautiful being, radiant in its own light. Had it been less lovely, I might have gasped with wonder. But the very perfection of its form and presence diffused an atmosphere of calm. I marveled not, because the state of my consciousness was marvel. I was lifted so far above the commonplace that I had no standard by which to measure the experience of that moment. Imagine youth immortalized, the fleeting made eternal. Imagine the bloom of a child's face in the eyes of the ages of knowledge. Imagine the brilliancy of 1,000 lives concentrated in those eyes, and the smile upon the lips of a love so pure that it asks no answering love from those it smiles upon. But the language of earth cannot describe the unearthly, nor could the understanding of man grasp in a moment those joys which the beautiful being revealed to me in that hour of supreme life. For the possibilities of existence have been widened for me, the meanings of the soul have deepened. Those who behold the beautiful being are never the same again as they were before. They may forget for a time and lose in the business of living the magic of that presence. But whenever they do remember, they are caught up again on the wings of the former rapture. It may happen to one who is living upon the earth. It may happen to one in the spaces between the stars. But the experience must be the same when it comes to all. For only to one in the state in which it dwells could the beautiful being reveal itself at all. A song of the beautiful being. When you hear a rustling in the air, listen again. There may be something there. When you feel a warmth mysterious and lovely in the heart, there may be something there, something sent to you from a warm and lovely source. When a joy unknown fills your being and your soul goes out, toward some lovely mystery, you know not where, know that the mystery itself is reaching toward you with warm and loving though invisible arms. We who live in the invisible are not invisible to each other. There are tender colors here and exquisite forms, and the eye gloats on beauty never seen upon the earth. Oh, the joy of simple life to be, and to sing to your soul all day as the bird sings to its mate. For you are singing to your mate whenever your soul sings. Did you fancy that it was only the springtime that thrilled you and moved you to listen to the rustling of wings? The springtime of the heart is all time, and the autumn may never come. Listen, when the lark sings, he sings to you. When the waters sing, they sing to you. As your heart rejoices, there is always another heart somewhere that responds. And the soul of the listening heavens grows glad with the mother joy. I am glad to be here. I am glad to be there. There is beauty wherever I go. Can you guess the reason, children of earth? Come out and play with me in the daisy fields of space. I will wait for you at the corner where the four winds meet. You will not lose your way if you follow the gleam at the end of the Garden of Hope. There is music also beyond the roar of the earth as it swishes through space. There is music in keys unknown to the duller ears of the earth, and harmonics whose chords are souls attuned to each other. Listen, do you hear them? Oh, the ears are made for hearing, and the eyes are made for seeing, and the heart is made for loving. The hours go by and leave no mark, and the years are as sylphs that dance on the air and leave no footprints, and the centuries search solemn and slow. But we smile, for joy is also in the solemn tread of the centuries. Joy, joy everywhere. It is for you and for me, and for you as much as for me. Will you meet me out where the four winds meet? Letter 36. The Hollow Sphere. Some time ago I started to write to you about certain visits which I had made to the infernal regions. But I was called away, and the letter was not finished. Tonight I will take up the story again. You must know that there are many hells, and they are mostly of our own making. That is one of those platitudes which are based upon fact. Desiring one day to see the particular kind of hell to which a drunkard would likely go, I sought that part of the hollow sphere around the world which corresponds to one of those countries where drunkenness is most common. Souls, when they come out, usually remain in the neighborhood where they have lived, unless there is some strong reason to the contrary. I had no difficulty in finding a hell full of drunkards. What do you fancy they were doing? Repenting their sins? Not at all. They were hovering around those places on earth where the fumes of alcohol and the heavier fumes of those who overindulge in alcohol made sickening the atmosphere. It is no wonder that sensitive people dislike the neighborhood of drinking saloons. You would draw back with disgust and refuse to write for me should I tell you all that I saw. One or two instances will suffice. I placed myself in a sympathetic and neutral state so that I could see into both worlds. A young man with restless eyes and a troubled face entered one of those gin palaces in which gilding and high-polished imitation mahogany tend to impress the miserable wayfarer with the idea that he is enjoying the luxury of the kingdoms of this world. The young man's clothes were threadbare, and his shoes had seen much wear. The stubble of beard was on his chin, for the price of a shave is the price of a drink, and a man takes that which he desires most, when he can get it. He was leaning on the bar, drinking a glass of some soul-destroying compound, and close to him, taller than he and bending over him with its repulsive, bloated, ghastly face pressed close to his, as if to smell his whiskey-tainted breath, was one of the most horrible astral beings which I have seen in this world since I came out. The hands of the creature, and I use that word to suggest his vitality, the hands of the creature were clutching the young man's form. One long and naked arm was around his shoulders, the other around his hips. It was literally sucking the liquor-soaked life of its victim, absorbing him, using him, in the successful attempt to enjoy vicariously the passion which death had intensified. But was that a creature in hell, you ask? Yes, for I could look into its mind and see its suffering. Forever, the words forever may be used of that which seems endless. This entity was doomed to crave and never be satisfied. There was in it just enough left of the mind which had made it man, just enough to catch a fitful glimpse now and then of the horror of its own state. It had no desire to escape, but the very consciousness of the impossibility of escape was an added torment. And dread was in the eyes of the thing, dread of the future into which it could not look, but which it felt waiting to drag it into that state of even greater suffering than its present, when the astral particles of its form, unable longer to hold together because of the absence of the unifying soul, would begin to rend and tear what was left of the mind and astral nerves, rending and tearing asunder in terror and pain that shape whose end was at hand. For only the soul endures, and that which the soul deserts must perish and disintegrate. And the young man who leaned on the bar in that gilded palace of gin was filled with a nameless horror and sought to leave the place. But the arms of the thing that was now his master clutched him tighter and tighter. The sodden vaporous cheek was pressed closer to his, the desire of the vampire creature aroused an answering desire in its victim, and the young man demanded another glass. Verily, earth and hell are neighboring states, and the frontier has never been charted. I have seen hells of lust and hells of hatred, hells of untruthfulness, where every object which the wretched dweller tried to grasp turned into something else which was a denial of the thing desired, where truth was mocked eternally and nothing was real. But everything, changing and uncertain as untruthfulness, became its own antithesis. I have seen the anguished faces of those not yet resigned to lies, have seen their frantic efforts to clutch reality which melted in their grasp. For the habit of untruthfulness, when carried into this world of shifting shapes, surrounds the untruthful person with ever-changing images which mock him and elude. Would he see the faces of his loved ones? The promise is given, and as the faces appear, they turn into grinning furies. Would he grasp in the memory the prizes of ambition? They are shown to be but disgrace in another form, and pride becomes weak shame. Would he clasp the hand of friendship? The hand is extended, but in its clutch is a knife which pierces the vitals of the liar without destroying him. And the futile attempt begins again over and over until the uneasy conscience is exhausted. Beware of deathbed repentance in its after-harvest of morbid memories. It is better to go into eternity with one's karmic burden bravely carried upon the back rather than to slink through the back door of hell in the stockinged feet of a sorry cowardice. If you have sinned, accept the fact with courage and resolve to sin no more. But he who dwells upon his sins in his last hour will live them over and over again in the state beyond the tomb. Every act is followed by its inevitable reaction. Every cause is accompanied by its own effect, which nothing, save the powerful dynamics of will itself, can modify. And when will modifies the effect of an antecedent cause, it is always by setting up a counteracting and more powerful cause than the first, a cause so strong that the other is irresistibly carried along with it. As a great flood can sweep a trickling stream of water from an open hose pipe, carrying the hose pipe causing its trickling effect along with the rushing torrent of its own flood. If you recognize the fact that you have sinned, set up good actions more powerful than your sins, and reap the rewards of those. There is much more to be said about hells, but this is enough for tonight. At another time I may return to the subject. Letter 37. An empty china cup. It is no wonder that children, no matter how old and experienced their souls, have to be retaught in each life the relative values of all things according to the artificial standards of the world. For out here, those values lose their meaning. That a soul had houses, lands, and honors among men does not increase his value in our eyes. We cannot hope to profit by his discarded riches. The soul in the hereafter builds his own house, and the materials thereof are free as air. If I use the house which another has built, I miss the enjoyment of creating my own. There is nothing worth stealing out here, so no one trembles for fear of burglars in the night. Even bores can be escaped by retiring to the very center of oneself, for a bore is himself too self-centered ever to pierce to the center of anyone else. On earth you value titles, inherited or acquired. Here man's name is not of much importance even to himself, and a visiting card would be lost through the cracks in the floor of heaven. No footman angel would ever deliver it to his lord and master. One day I met a lady recently arrived. She had not been here long enough to have lost her assurance of superiority over ordinary men and angels. That morning I had on my best Roman toga, for I had been reliving the past, and the lady, mistaking me for Caesar or some other ancient aristocrat, asked me to direct her to a place where gentlewomen congregated. I was forced to admit that I did not know of any such resort, but as the visitor seemed lonely and bewildered, I invited her to rest beside me for a time and to question me if she wished. I have been here several months, I said, and I have gained considerable experience. It was plain to see that she was puzzled by my remark. She glanced at my classical garment, and I could feel her thinking that there was something incongruous between it and my assertion that I had been here only a few months. Perhaps you were an actor, she said. We are all actors here, I replied. This seemed to puzzle her more than ever, and she said that she did not understand. I felt sorry for her, and I tried my best to explain to her the conditions under which we live. You must know in the first place, I said, that this is the land of realized ideals. Now a man who has always desired to be a king can play the part up here if he wishes to, and no one will laugh at him. For each spirit has some favorite dream which he acts out to his own satisfaction. We have, madam, I continued, reacquired the tolerance and the courtesy of children who never ridicule one another's play. Is heaven merely a playroom, she asked in a shocked tone. Not at all, I answered, but you are not in heaven. Her look of apprehension caused me immediately to add, nor you are in hell either. What was your religion upon earth? Why, I professed the usual religion of my country and station, but I never gave it much thought. Perhaps the idea of purgatory is not unfamiliar to you. I am not a papist, she said with some warmth. Nevertheless, a papist in your position would conceive himself to be in purgatory. I am certainly not happy, she admitted, because everything is so strange. Have you no friends here, I inquired. I must have many acquaintances, she said, but I never cared for intimate friendships. I used to entertain a good deal. My husband's political position demanded it. Perhaps there is someone on this side to whom you were especially kind at some time or other, someone whose grief you helped to bear, whose poverty you eased. I patronized our organized charities. I fear that sort of help is too impersonal to be remembered here. Have you no children? No. No brothers or sisters on this side? I quarreled with my only other brother for marrying beneath him. But surely, I said, you must have had a mother. Was she not waiting for you when you came over? No. This surprised me, for I have been told that all mother spirits who have not gone back to the world know a peculiar thrill when a child to which they have given birth is about to be reborn into the spiritual world, a sort of sympathetic afterpain, the final and sweetest reward of motherhood. Then she must have reincarnated, I said. Do you hold to that pagan belief, the lady inquired with just a touch of superiority. I thought that only queer people, theosophists and such, believed in reincarnation. I was always queer, I admitted. But you know, of course, dear madam, that about 3/4 of the Earth's inhabitants are familiar with the theory in some form or other. We continued our talk for a little time, and meanwhile I was puzzling my heart as to what I could do to help this poor lonely woman for whom no one was waiting. I passed in mental review this and that ministering angel of my acquaintance and wondered which of them would be considered most correct from the conventional earthly point of view. The noblest of them was usually at the side of some newly arrived unfortunate woman, to use a euphemism of that polite society which my latest protege had frequented. The others were here, there, and everywhere, but generally with those souls who needed them most, while the need of my present companion was more real than urgent. If Lionel had been here, he might have entertained her for a while. I wish that I had cultivated the acquaintance of some of those ladies who crochet and gossip in this world as they crocheted and gossiped in yours. Do not be shocked. Did you fancy that a lifelong habit could be laid aside in a moment? As women on Earth dream often of their knitting, so they do here. It is as easy to knit in this world as it is to dream in yours. Understand that the world in which I now live is no more essentially sacred than is the world in which you live, nor is it any more mysterious to those who dwell in it. To the serious soul, all conditions are sacred, except those that are profane, and both are found out here as well as on the earth. But to return to the lonely woman, I was still wondering what I should do with her when looking up I saw the teacher approaching. He had with him another woman, as like the first as one empty china cup is like another empty china cup. Then he and I went away and left the two together. I did not know, I said to the teacher, that you troubled yourself with any souls but those of considerable development. He smiled. It was your perplexity that I came to relieve, not that of those poor ladies. Then he began to talk to me about relative values. In a sense, he said, one soul is as much worth helping as another. In a deeper sense, perhaps it is not. Do not think that I am indifferent to the sufferings of the weakest ones because I give my time and attention to the strong. Like the ministering angels, I go where I am most needed. Only the strong ones can learn what I have to teach. The weak ones are the charges of the messiahs and their followers. But nevertheless, between us and the messiahs there is brotherhood and there is mutual understanding. Each works in his own field. The messiahs help the many, we help the few. Their reward in love is greater than ours, but we do not work for reward any more than they do. Each follows the law of his being. To be loved by all men, a teacher must be known to all men, and we reveal ourselves only to a few chosen ones. Why do we not go the way of the messiahs? Because the balance must be maintained. For every great worker in the sight of men, there is another worker out of sight. What kind of teacher is of greater value? The question is out of order. The North and the South are interdependent, and there are two poles to every magnet. You have been listening to Classic Paranormal's reading of Letters from a Living Dead Man by Elsa Barker. This was the third installment. Be sure to click into the succeeding episodes until the book is complete. Until then, followers of the freaky, aficionados of the afterworldly, connoisseurs of the creepy, stay spooky. Before you go, consider subscribing to my new podcast, Classic Paranormal. It's a clearinghouse for lost real-life accounts of true ghost stories. It's found on Apple Podcasts. Go there now if you're interested in enigmatic tales, chilling true accounts, chronicles from cases of the past that time has forgotten, but that the modern person who likes relaxing by a campfire swapping ghost stories might appreciate. As I said, the new podcast I'm launching is available on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and there's a link in the description below on this video.